The shutdown continues.
The Dan York State of Mind program is brought to you in part by Lookout Rhode Island and Takeo Comfort Solutions.
Alrighty, so it's about time that we took a look at the shutdown again and to talk about the practical applications of it and what it means here and security and border issues, and the idea that the shutdown and border security are at odds, I think is a very strange thing, right? It's not where we're supposed to be. But in terms of security, there's nobody better than our former Adjutant General, who is here in studio to talk to us about that, so we'll get to that momentarily. It's a pleasure to have you aboard on this Monday evening. Let's just check into a couple of issues locally that are driving conversation around the region. So over the weekend, the governor cried uncle, I guess, on recreational marijuana. I'm not sure that this is going to be as easy as she may project it will be in the General Assembly for passage. Speaker Mattiello, doggone it, you know, if I'd known this was really on her agenda for State of the State tomorrow night, I would have asked him about that last week when he was here. But we'll catch up with him both here and on the radio, of course, weekdays 3 to 6 on WPRO. The governor says we're cornered. You know, Massachusetts is doing what it's doing, and Connecticut may soon be, and New York and New Jersey are taking a look at it, and yada, 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 yada. And it's not about the money. Let me tell you something. Anytime an elected official tells you it's not about the money, no, it's all about the money. I get the security stuff. Do we want people driving to Massachusetts back and forth? All you dopers out there who just can't get enough, blah, 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 blah. Oh, sorry. Is that politically incorrect now? The point here is it's always about the money. And believe me, they have the money projection right off the top, $6.5 billion, you know, right away. Or $1 million. Hey, if it was $1 billion, I'd be getting high with you, crying out loud. But anyway, we'll see how this plan rolls out. It's going to be touchy. And for some reason, when Rhode Island seems to roll out a new project like this, it just never seems to go exactly the way they put it on the book. We'll see. All right, in the meantime, this is a disgrace. This headline is enough for me to want to just jump off the Superman building, which is kind of dark. See, it's hard to get up there right now. But former state representative Aaron Regenberg has a new job. Now follow this, right? Mayor Elorza heard that Mr. Regenberg, come on back to me, Eric, here. I want to look people in the eye when I tell him this. Mayor Elorza said to Mr. Regenberg, please don't run against me for mayor, because Mr. Regenberg, the 27, 28-year-old upstart two-term state representative, as you see right there, was floating that idea. So Regenberg instead decided to put his marker on the lieutenant governor position. Mayor Elorza said, if you do that, I'll support you and endorse you and move away from all the other mayors who were endorsing the incumbent Dan McKee. Well, Aaron Regenberg threw a lot at Dan McKee, but couldn't pull it off and lost. And lo and behold, Mr. Regenberg now is employed with an $80,000 job in a high policy advisory position. By the way, if you're really high, you don't, I'm talking about up the ladder, you don't get paid less than $100,000. So this is a junk position created in the oh-so financially desperate city of Providence as a political payback and nothing more, and do not believe anything else you're told about his expertise in pre-K, which is what is going to be his advisory position, and affordable housing. Yeah, he's an organizer and he's an energetic guy. He's also going back to law school in the fall. And there's your key indicator. No mayor who has any vision at all hires somebody on the payroll line for an annual salary, knowing that 6 months later the guy's going to skip, at least part-time, to go commute to Boston, to Harvard, to law school. This is disgusting. It's disgusting. It's a quid pro quo, the likes of which Mayor Elorza would suggest he could never, ever do. You know, Buddy Cianci, God rest his soul, was this bad guy. You know, the gotta-know-a guy stuff. Let me tell you, Elorza has perfected it. He perfected it with Brett Smiley, who was running against him the last election, with Mike Solomon, who was running against him the last election, both of whom were offered jobs. And now we've got this. It stinks to high heaven, and you should raid City Hall. You should go right in there and tell them that you won't tolerate this. I wonder whether the new city council president has the backbone to say, you know what, enough of this. In the meantime, let's talk about what we've got here. We got a headline on the government shutdown. It's now, week 2.5, and here's the latest from the network on that.
A Republican ally of President Trump wants him to reopen the government.
I would urge him to open up the government for a short period of time, like 3 weeks, before he pulls the plug, see if we can get a deal.
It's unclear where President Trump stands on a deal. Over the weekend, he tweeted that the damage done to our country from a badly broken border is far greater than a shutdown.
Put an end to this shutdown and put everything on the table.
Democrats say the shutdown should end, and then they'll negotiate border security.
We were willing to talk about more border security when we were talking about DACA and Dreamers and coming up with a border security plan that made sense, not some medieval wall.
Meanwhile, 800,000 federal employees remain furloughed or working without pay. TSA employees are calling out sick at a higher rate. That forced Miami International Airport to close a terminal over the weekend. Houston's Bush International Airport also closed parts of a terminal on Sunday.
And so today, the local federal delegation, in its full width and breadth, all 4 elected officials got together on the suggestion and invitation of Jim Langevin, 2nd District Congressman. There's a headline here that depicts the event. I was in attendance at it, and here's a conversation that Sheldon Whitehouse and Jack Reed both brought to the table.
I've seen much of Leader McConnell. He's become sort of the Punxsutawney Phil of the shutdown crisis, down in his groundhog hole, refusing to do anything, refusing to call up bills, and it's time for our Republican colleagues to root him out of his hole before we get to actual Groundhog Day and let the Senate do its business.
We have never seen a detailed plan for those portions of the border that should have a wall or a fence or remote sensors, etc. Until we see such a plan, should we, in good conscience and in good faith, American people, appropriate $5 billion for a bumper sticker?
And so there's kind of where we are. There's the politics that Sheldon Whitehouse was addressing, and then there's the actual border security issue mixed with the politics that Jack Reed was talking about. The air traffic controller union president was at this event today as well, and while he suggests that security, meaning safety in the air, is not a worry yet, it's all about the stress and the pressure that those people are working under, not being able to catch a paycheck, and mortgages and all that kind of a thing. So let's spread it out and talk to our former Adjutant General, Lieutenant General Reginald Centracchio, who has not been here for a while. My friend, Happy New Year. You look wonderful.
I'm hanging on tight.
You're not hanging on tight.
Sure, yeah.
We're crying out loud. Gut check. Give me your executive summary on this whole mess, and then we'll dig in, because I want to pick your security brain, certainly. But you have a little bit of a, political instinct as well. So tell me all about it.
Well, I think it's absolutely essential that we understand when we refer to the wall, it's not a physical wall that goes across the entire border of our southern border with Mexico. It's a composite effort between some physical aspects of it, some technology, some border patrol, bridges and access points and so on. Some are not penetrable at all. I've been there. I've seen that. You can't come across the Rio Grande in different areas. So you don't need that. Maybe you need some obvious panorama vision of it to be able to send resources should that be needed. But I think as far as I'm concerned, when you talk about politics, this is clearly politics. When you talk about people wanting the wall, I do believe that President Obama wanted the wall. I believe that Nancy Pelosi wanted the wall. Chuck Schumer wanted the wall during that administration. Now all of a sudden the wall is not good anymore, at least the definition of it, and we have a political situation going. I do believe we need a wall, but I think it needs clarification. I also think that the president is doing a bad job on being able to articulate what he means by the wall. And the American people are just envisioning that it's a big 14-foot structure across the entire southern border. It isn't. And I think when you talk about the protection of our borders, we need to also keep in mind that that's only a physical aspect of somebody coming across from Mexico or perhaps other parts of using Mexico as an avenue. Our airports and our ports are clearly as much of a concern, and they should be, as it relates to border control.
Well,
and how we do that.
When it comes to the president, and you're suggesting he's doing a lousy job at communicating, gee, what a new day. He doesn't help himself when he suggests that 90% of the heroin is coming across the border where he wants to put the wall. 90% of our heroin does come from Mexico, but it comes to these very ports that you're speaking about.
Exactly.
And so, I mean, he can't get his story straight, which isn't helping him. Yeah. Right?
You're right. And I think if you put the entire package out there, where is the biggest threat that we have to illegal immigration? That's one part of it. I do believe that the people coming here from Guatemala and Central America want to come to a better place, and I understand that. But within that, there's also a concern about terrorism and bringing drugs and other contraband into the country. That has to be put in a proper perspective, and I don't think that's been well articulated as far as I can see. You know, I was also in the position of Homeland Security Advisor for Rhode Island, so I've had some access to some of these things over the last bunch of years, and we can't expect that all of our woes are going to go away because we put up a physical barrier somewhere. For everything you do, there's a counteraction by those that want to go around it some way. And I think what we need to do is to present and once again, I'm not getting on the Democrat side or the Republican side, but the Democrats make a good point, and that is that they need to see the overall plan. What is it besides having an immigration policy? That's clearly one of the main points of it. We need to see what we're going to do with our airports. We need to see what we're going to ports. What about the Canadian border? What about people just coming in from other parts of the Atlantic Ocean and Pacific Ocean? All that takes place with a various and a myriad of reasons to come across. That needs to be articulated.
So with all of that to chew on, how does that all get figured out in the midst of the urgency of a shutdown? We'll talk about that next.
Democrats in Congress have refused to acknowledge the crisis, and they have refused to provide our brave border agents with the tools they desperately need to protect our families and our nation.
Actually, I'm not so sure of that either. The thing is so confusing. You know, it's funny. Today, I spoke with Jim Langevin, who hosted this press conference over at the airport with all 4 members of the delegation, and you know they're pounding away and pounding away and pounding away. But I asked Jim, well, what do you want to see? And he went into an alliteration not too dissimilar to what you just did, General, with all the aspects and all of the considerations. And I said to him, well, given that this seems to be a now broader conversation, maybe you give the president credit for that. How does all that get done in the midst of the shutdown pressure? And of course their answer is that's why we should eliminate the shutdown and then get down to work. In fact, Lindsey Graham, the Republican senator this weekend, suggested that we have a 3-week moment here where we put everything on the table and try to get something scratched out, and if not, an emergency declaration by the president. That's the funky part of this whole thing, isn't it? The shutdown, the president right now seems to think that his compromise is to end the shutdown. The shutdown ending will be a result of a compromise.
That's the way I see it.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So we're stuck.
Yeah.
How do we unstick ourselves?
First
I don't know.
Of all, I don't think the shutdown should be any part of any negotiation.
Right.
Because you're hurting people that do their job. Loyalty.
You lived through that when you were running the Guard?
I was the Adjutant General during the last time, and that was about 21 days that we went through that. And the Guard and the military was involved in that one. We had to put people on furlough and so on. And there was a lot of bad feelings out there. They're willing to put themselves in harm's way and go do battle and so on. And all of a sudden, they're being penalized because of a political scenario that needs to be solved other than taking money or placing hardships on families. So I think what I'd like to see is do away with any kind of shutdown. If there's to be any kind of liability as far as money is concerned, it should be on the shoulders of the senators and congressmen themselves until they get the thing resolved. And well, I know know the president doesn't take any money anyway, as far as I know. But that's not the point. The point is that you should place this burden on those that make the decision, not on those that have nothing to do with the decision and become pawns in this overall negotiations thing. So I do believe that both sides have a point. Somebody told me this a long time ago, a guy named Sam Turtelot up in Situate. He said, you know, if you know what the answer is and you can't get there, change the formula. And if you want to get there, and everybody believes, I do think, that the Democrats and Republicans do want to see secure borders. They want to see some kind of immigration. At the same time, they don't know how to get there. So if you change how you're getting there, and shutdowns is not the way, in my opinion, that needs to be resolved.
Well, you talked about the president not doing a very good job of articulating. It makes me ask this question. Is this something that he absolutely wants, or is he just satisfied right now with being in the center of a controversy that at least is governmental in nature and not corrupt in nature, right? There's all this other Mueller investigation stuff swirling around him. It seems to me that if he was earnest in wanting to get this thing done, he would make a real big public deal about a DACA exchange. You know, something of formula that would bring the answer, which the Democrats say that they want, which is they too want border security. When he says that at his address, the Democrats have consistently articulated that they want border security support. In fact, they've got $1.3 billion proposed again in the budget for that very thing. It's so hard for the average person to figure out who's leading the league and most disingenuous in this argument. What does your gut tell you?
My gut tells me it's political.
Well, that's true. But who's? You know, I always think that this political thing connotes bad. Politics runs the system.
No, that's not my interpretation of political. It means that you have a point of view on this particular side, and you have a point of view on this particular side. Because you can't agree.
Do you find a symmetric responsibility in bad behavior? Do you find it to be
absolutely
equally?
Absolutely.
Why?
I think because it's a maneuvering that they're doing as to who tells a story best will eventually win. I think that's the bottom line. If you tell a story that we do need border security, it must be all-encompassing, including an immigration bill.
Who doesn't want border security?
No one that I know of.
Right.
But when you hear people, we'll take the extremes. Let's just use the positions right now. The President of the United States wants a border across the entire southern perimeter. That's what you hear. It's not necessarily what
his latest offer is less than 300 miles.
Correct.
The $5.6 billion is less than 300 miles.
On the other hand, you hear Nancy Pelosi saying that, that's not American. We don't need border walls. You know, at the same time, I would suggest that when you go to her household, there's some way of getting into it rather than just walking in the front door. And that needs to be articulated. What do you mean when you say we don't need border walls?
I think Schumer is much more open to the idea of a modification, and even the president, to his credit, in this conversation, is still barrier languaged right now. But he has created this political image, maybe even this myth, as you said earlier, of this grand wall of China that goes 2,000 miles, and his base is fixed on that. He has a hard time, coming off a picture like that and changing his tune. And he's offered hardly anything specific to break the logjam. It's almost as if he's enjoying this thing. And even the float of emergency declaration, which he probably instinctively knows if it gets stopped in the court, isn't the thing he wants to do, because it's almost as if the joy of this, if there is any, is in the fight.
I agree. Once again, I think that's his MO. He's used to negotiations. He's not a politician in the sense of what a politician is supposed to mean. He's come out of the business environment. You want this, you give me this. It's total negotiation. But when you start using federal employees and those that have nothing to do with the actual decision-making process, that's, in my opinion, not a negotiating pawn that shouldn't be there.
All right. So if we could wave the magic wand, what would the general do to solve this? He's got 2 minutes to figure it out. We'll be right back. All right. Waving the magic wands. What would you do?
I would do what I used to do when I was the commander of the Guard. You tell your troops and your staff, this is my vision, this is the goal, here are the resources. Don't come back until you have a solution. That's the bottom line. And I don't think that has been tried, as far as I can see. I recognize that when you throw politics into that...
Well, they've had their meetings, one on TV, one in private. In TV, he took ownership of the shutdown, and in private, he walked out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's at that level. But I'm talking about the staffs and the people that make things work. There has to be a solution to this, and somewhere in between everybody wanting a border and how do you get there is yet to be resolved. And I think that's what needs to be done. You give them your actual vision, your actual goal. Here are the resources, and don't come back until we have a solution to this. But don't penalize anybody else beyond that particular group. And that worked fine during my administration, and I think it needs to be tried at the national level.
But that's something that comes from a point guy. You're the general. You've got the authority and the capability. And I'm sure there are military and CEO types and general managers and school principals and whomever who lead organizations who are terrific leaders who say the very same thing. We got to lock ourselves in a room until we figure this thing out. We're not coming out until we do so. For some reason, that doesn't seem to apply here. It doesn't seem to apply. It's just a slippery mess of leadership. Even Senator Whitehouse was talking about Mitch McConnell today, calling him Punxsutawney Phil, hiding in a hole. I get what he's saying because, frankly, it looks like they might have the override ability right now to open the government, despite the president's shutdown signature, or lack of signature for a bill to open it up. But they don't want to show up the president because they all then think they're DOA in their districts. So. Coming right back to your original premise, the politics preventing the leadership from occurring. When do the politics become urgent? When things start to break or an airplane has a problem, right?
Exactly. When you see a compromise of what we take for granted, you will see something will be done. And I do believe that over the next several days, and I don't have any inside information on this, obviously, but I do believe that there are considerations such as DACA will be part of that formula. If you want this, I need this. But we will end up with border security. And I think at some juncture over the next several days or so, I think you'll start to see that. I do believe that the president is in a point where he recognizes he's not going to get this done with the present MO. And I do believe that the Congress, and specifically the House, is not going to get it done with what they're going to. Somewhere in between lies the answer.
Appreciate your perspective. Thank you for it.
Okay.
All right. Final word and we come back. The general is so right. You just got to lock yourself in a room and you got to figure the whole thing out. But it does seem to me that it's going to be a near miss, a mishap, something that causes the general public to really, really begin to have anxiety about this shutdown. Because right now, everybody feels bad for those employees who have to, wait for a check, and all the sob stories, legitimate as they are, aren't moving the politics of this. Something worries us, or God forbid something happens, you watch these people figure it out but quick. Let's just pray that that's not the cause. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow at 3 on WPRO. Good night.